All right. Well, hello, welcome, folks. Today I'm talking with Alex Fergnani. Our focus today is going to be his recent book called The Tao of Foresight. This was published in last year, 2025, by Penguin. It's really an unusual kind of book, partly an introduction to foresight and scenario planning, but it's also in the form of an wuxia novel, a kind of martial arts novel. So I want to talk about this and hopefully also more generally about the relevance of East Asian philosophies and practices for today, something I'm also a little bit, have been a little bit interested in recently. Just a little bit of background before we begin, and Alex can add anything else that seems relevant. But Alex is originally from Italy, I think, but's been living in Asia for many years. He's an expert in strategic foresight and scenario planning. Has a master's degree in futures studies from Tom Kong University in Taiwan. Taiwan is where I usually am, but not today. And he has a PhD in management and organization from NUS Business School in Singapore. He's also studied some different Asian martial arts and wellness practices, which we'll hopefully talk a little bit about today. And you should check out his YouTube channel for more about these things. And you can also find his writings, academic writings, other kinds of writings online. So, Alex, if you don't mind, I'd like to dive right into your book, The Tao of Foresight. And of course, we can bring in other things as we feel the need to or feel the inspiration for. But maybe starting with that title, Tao and Foresight. So these are two difficult concepts potentially. I'm curious what they mean to you and how we can think about connecting them together.
All right, let's dive in. Thank you so much, by the way, David, for having me. This is a pleasure. It's always awesome to talk about these themes. Where do I start? It's so difficult to start. The first line of the Tao Te Ching states that we cannot talk about the Tao, right? This is the funny part. And so it's almost elusive. It's almost like a disservice to talk about these things because one of the key principles of Taoism is that you cannot name it. It really starts like that. How is it that the Tao that can be named is not the real Tao? Something like that. I can't remember correctly, word by word, but this is pretty much it, right?
Right.
So, in fact, one of the things about Taoism is the impossibility of knowing. This uh, emptiness in the solar plexus when it comes to knowing. You cannot know it in full. It's always about not knowing. In fact, it's always uncertain. There's this limit of knowledge, right? So, right there, right in front of everything, is facing uncertainty and how Taoism faces uncertainty. In the very first line of the Tao Te Ching is in the very purpose of Taoism, in the inability of knowing, and in fact, in the very idea that knowing is risible. Like you want to know, Lao Tzu would just laugh in response. You want to know, right? How dare you, right? So in the very first line, the very first concept of Taoism is the impossibility of knowing. Is the stance towards facing uncertainty is we cannot know it. Might as well live with it,
Hmm.
right? Might as well just be okay with it. This is perhaps the one, I wouldn't say the most important thing, but one of the most important concepts in Taoism. Just live with it. And it's common, by the way, in Eastern Asian philosophies more generally, I dare say. And that's the interesting part. That is also common. That's the same in strategic foresight, which is one of the things I dabbled with for a long time. Now I'm not studying it anymore. It's kind of a chapter of my life that I closed because I said everything I needed to say about it. But
Hmm.
it's very similar. So in Taoism and other Eastern Asian philosophies as well as strategic foresight, there is this underlying um, impossibility of knowing and the fact that we need to grow capable of just being okay with not knowing, okay with uncertainty, unflappable under uncertainty. In Zen Buddhism, it would be more about equanimity towards uncertainty, just being okay with it. There are similar concepts in the West as well. I'm not saying this is absolutely and completely exclusively coming from the East. In the West, there is a concept called negative capability. that dates back to poet John Keats,
Right.
200 years ago, more than 200 years ago, which is basically the idea of being not irritable um, in the face of the sublime, so
Hmm.
to speak, to summarize. And that has been a quality that has been used ever since. So ever since it was uh, created by John Keats, it is a quality that has been used to describe a very capable, literally capable and very romantic poets and writers such as Shakespeare's, because they are just okay with uncertainty, okay with not knowing.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna bounce it back to you. What do you think when I say being okay in the face of uncertainty? Does it ring a bell to you as well? Because I know you're also into these themes, especially recently. You're looking at Taoism as well, if I'm not wrong, from a more literally standpoint. So what
Yeah.
what what do you say
Hmm.
when I mention this facing uncertainty idea?
Yeah, I think that's a really central idea. I notice it's something that you have talked a lot about in your writings. It's something that I think, well, probably all of us, most of us deal with in our lives. And so it's something I think that we all try to figure out our own ways for dealing with uncertainty. It's something also that comes up in my philosophical interests,
Yeah.
and the kind of background of 19th and 20th century philosophy where things were changing so quickly and people were feeling a lot of uncertainty about how to interpret the world. And
Mm.
I think one thing some people latched onto was Eastern philosophies, Zen, Buddhism, Vedantic religion, the Indian religions, Hinduism, and as well as Taoism.
Yeah.
Taoism has had a kind of a lesser influence, I think. I think Zen was much better popularized in the
Right, in
United
the
States.
US for sure,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure.
But I guess I found Taoism very attractive, I think, for that reason, partly for that reason, for various reasons, I think, but just because it kind of resonates with um, this need to deal with uncertainty and change, which I think is comes out in a lot of the philosophy and literature that I'm interested in from the
Yeah.
19th and 20th century. Um,
Absolutely. This is an existential problem, by the way. At some point, if you start thinking and digging in philosophy, you will face it. They may talk about it in different ways with different jargon, but facing uncertainty is always there. Mm. And something I want to pick up on what you said. It's very common to be fascinated by Eastern Asian ways to deal with uncertainty and Eastern Asian ways to, in general, in the West, which is fascinating. Like, why don't we look at our own wisdom?
mhm.
Because there is actually a lot of wisdom on philosophy and this topic of facing uncertainty in general. And I was thinking, this is actually one of the themes I've been thinking more recently, also as I was reflecting about what we could talk about in this conversation.
Mhm.
And I realized actually there is a lot of counterparts in the West that do deal with this problem, such as, for first and foremost, postmodernism, more
Mhm.
recently, right?
Right.
And also chaos theory
Mm.
and post-normal science. So there are schools of thought in the West that try to deal with this problem. So the question for me is, why are we uh, oftentimes fascinated to look at these? And
Right.
that's the answer I gave to this question, which is obviously very preliminary, is that at least in my case, it seems to me that Eastern Asian philosophies deal with uncertainty in a very uh, serene way.
Hmm.
So, in other words, if postmodern, post-normal, and Western ways to look at the problem of uncertainty tend to be critical, tend to be reactionary, which comes with a heavy feeling, right? Like almost like a heavy chest.
Yeah.
In the East, it seems to be the opposite. It's almost like, yeah, we're trying to, what we're trying to do here is to be at peace. It's the
Hmm.
opposite of being reactionary and combative. So that for me at least is very attractive because at the end of the day, I mean, why don't we all want peace, right? Peace is one of the one of the highest forms of pursuits.
Right.
So I think that's one of the things that attracts me as well
Yeah, I
towards.
think just I'll pick up on one thing you said. I think you're right that there are many attempts and efforts by people in the West to deal with these same topics. You can find kind of
Especially
similar
recently.
trends recently, and I think even going back further. And
Yeah.
but one thing that is maybe different about
Mm.
Eastern, the kind of classic or ancient Eastern philosophies. So in the West, we have, especially in the 20th century, we have kind of the philosophical side that tries to deal with it, and then we have a kind of a wellness side, a practical
Yeah.
side of
Yeah.
relaxation techniques and these different things. And you find that I find that to be more integrated, kind of the metaphysical perspective, along with maybe meditation practices or other kinds of lifestyle practices, a little bit more integrated when you look at kind of the ancient Asian philosophies. And whereas in the West, it's more separate things done
Ah,
by
yes.
different
Yeah,
people.
you're right. You're right. That's another very interesting thing. Yeah, which totally dovetails with what I was saying, because it has been ever since the beginning of these philosophies that there has always been this idea that we are doing it to achieve inner peace, to achieve wellness. So the practices suggested to deal with it, such as forms of meditation, come along with the philosophy, right? But
Hmm.
in the West, it's either the philosophical reaction or the yoga yoga
Hmm.
lifestyle stripped of any philosophical content.
Hmm.
So yeah, I agree with you on that. It's interesting.
Yeah. And maybe to get back to well, maybe
Mm,
your own work. Well, there's a
mm,
couple different areas I want to go into. I do want to,
yeah.
I do want to. So there's this idea you mentioned about organizational meditation, but I think before
Mm,
we get into that, which I think relates to what we were just talking about, but before we get into that, maybe um, you can introduce a little bit about what you're trying to do in the book, because I don't know if everyone listening to this will have the idea of what foresight, what that kind of implies, or what things like what a practice like scenario planning is, which is a kind of, you can think about it as a kind of lifestyle practice as well. It's usually been aimed at organizations, businesses, things like that. But maybe you can say a little bit about I don't know, maybe your background or interest in the foresight disciplines and how you were trying to introduce those through this book, The Tao of Foresight, just so everyone's
okay,
on the
okay.
same page.
Yeah, so I will start before my interest in forces. So, since I was a very small kid, I was fascinated with Eastern Asian philosophies and martial arts. I went to China. I moved to China when I was 21 to study under Kung Fu Master 101, and that's what I did for 3 years. And then I moved to Taiwan to study a master's degree in future studies. And originally, I did not even know what future studies was. I just found the master program extremely fascinating because all the classes sounded very unusual, very forward-looking, and also I got a scholarship. So I thought, why not? I am an intellectual kind. I feel like I want to go back to academia to study a master's degree to forward my education. So I went to Taiwan and I took this master's in future studies, and that's where I was introduced to all these tools, scenario planning, trend analysis, and also theories of change at a more philosophical level. Um, it was only later during my PhD where I was doing research in Singapore, during my PhD in Singapore, where I was doing the research in foresight, within the foresight, when I started to think, hey, maybe we can combine this discipline of foresight and strategic foresight and scenario planning with my interest in Eastern Asian philosophies because there are commonalities in there. So in short, by the way, just for people who never heard of strategic foresight, these are tools to analyze to analyze and use the futures in a systematic way for improving decision making in the present. So I'm making it very simple. I'm making it very simple also because don't want to get in the logics of it. It gives me a headache at this point in my life to go back to the logics of it. But to make it very simple, it's a set of tools to use images of the futures, future scenarios, future prototypes. So the futures in plural, systematically to improve decision making in the present. So it's about managing uncertainty again. And when I first approached it in Tamkan, by the way, we're both you're based in Taiwan. I was based in Taiwan, so we're both familiar with the Taiwanese environment. Educationally speaking, Taiwan is a very interesting place because um, it's a combination of cultures, East and West. There's tons of university. I'm not sure why. This is another topic of a podcast topic. There are dozens of universities in Taiwan. They're very advanced in their education. So in Taiwan, when I was introduced to these methods, I was introduced to their Western version. They were teaching the Western version of them. Not because of a choice, but because really scenario planning, strategic foresight have been primarily developed in the West. So there is a strong emphasis of Western approaches dating to the Second World War in the military context, the Rand Corporation, Herman Kahn trying to predict futures of war and outcomes of using atomic bombs, etc. So there is a Western legacy that went on to influence then the corporate world, military legacy that went on to influence the corporate world in the 1960s and 70s with Pierre Wack at Shell and using scenario planning to foresee scenarios of the oil crisis and so on. So there is a very strong legacy of Western scholarship. And that's why when I was introduced to these methods in Taiwan, uh, that's what I studied, Western scenario planning. It was taught by Taiwanese professors, but it was a Western approach. Then later in my PhD, I started to think, hey, but there are so many interesting Eastern concepts that we can apply to these methods. In fact, there are almost hidden Eastern origins to these methods. In fact, few people know that Pierre Wack, one of the founding fathers of scenario planning, traveled to Asia extensively and lived in a Buddhist monastery, in a Zen monastery for a while, and then was studying under Indian Hindu mentor for a while as well in India. So he was absorbing Eastern Asian wisdom, especially regarding the idea of dealing with uncertainty, returning to a beginner's mind from Zen, learning through koans, right? He used the koans, used these short quips, quotes of wisdom that are supposed to awake your mind from the mental torpor you've been all your life. And so, where was I at? So, yes, so few people would know that it was people like Pierre Wack traveled to East Asia to then be influenced to create tools such as scenario planning. So the very Western connotation and legacy of strategic foresight actually has Eastern origins, at least partially, at least partially.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sought to return to these origins through a book because it needed some discussion. It was not just an article project. This was a very heavy project. There are things from Zen Buddhism that can be used in foresight. There are things from Daoism. There are things from Confucianism that can be used in foresight. So I wanted to write a book about it. But at the same time, just because I'm not the typical academic, I didn't want to write another textbook because there are so many textbooks, right? And they tend to be pretty boring, especially in this era of AI where knowledge is available at a fingertip. It's just a very boring endeavor, both to read and to write a textbook. So I didn't want to write a textbook. I thought I would want to write something fun, something engaging, something memorable. I thought I wanted to write a story. And I've always been interested in Eastern Asian stories, especially I've been a reader, a fan, and a reader of the wuxia genre of wuxia novels, which, by the way, for those who don't know, those are kung fu chivalry novels originating from China, especially Hong Kong. So I combine all my interest in this book. I wrote a story, a wuxia story, kung fu inspired, wuxia inspired, so that it would be more memorable and more engaging than the typical textbook. And in the story, it's basically a hero's journey of a young boy who, in an identified village in ancient Asia. So I didn't really want to say China, Japan, Korea. No, it's just unidentified. But
Hmm.
people will see the references to all of these countries. And this boy is running into some issues, some problems especially problems with governance of this small village. And so he goes out on a journey to seek for a master. So in the typical Kung Fu story, the master would teach the boy Kung Fu, right? And then the
Hmm.
boy would defeat some villains using Kung Fu. But in my book, the boy learns foresight instead of Kung Fu from this master and defeats the villain using foresight. That's the interesting part. So it's a combination of wuxia, Kung Fu, Eastern Asian archetypes, but also there are deeper philosophical teachings that the master in the book imparts the boy. And those teachings are foresight teachings, but the interesting part is that this master is teaching foresight to the student through Eastern Asian wisdom. So he would use quotes from Zen, quotes from Daoism, blended with foresight concepts to teach foresight to the hero in the story. Just because there is so much in common between these traditions, and it all boils down to managing uncertainty. So this was a summary of the book. I
Yeah, and
hope it
it's a
was
very
exhaustive.
yeah, good. Yeah, and it's a very intriguing idea for, I guess, presenting this kind of information. It's a very readable book. It's got its
Thank
narrative,
you.
but Alex also weaves in, um, these more explanatory parts that kind of give you the basics of different things. A few things I wanted to kind of ask about that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, uh, and you use in the book, Confucianism, Daoism, and Zen Buddhism. And Alex also has a kind of appendix to the book that kind of goes into more details about some of these things. But how do you how would you explain to people who maybe aren't so familiar
Mm.
about the differences between these three main
Ooh.
traditions that you talk about?
Very good question. Very good question. At this point, David, to be honest with you, I do not see the difference anymore because I do believe and I see them as a unified whole.
Hmm.
But of course, yes, in the book, I draw distinctions. Um, and yes, just to pick up on your point, to be clear, the book is a novel, so it could be read as a novel, and then there are additional text boxes that discuss the concepts, the more the philosophical teachings in depth. So the reader can either read both, so the more philosophical parts in the text boxes and the novel, or could just read the novel, or could just skip to the text boxes. So it's really up
Hmm.
to whatever the reader feels. And as you said, yes, at the end, I also have an appendix where I explain, hey, what are Taoism, Zen Buddhism, and Confucianism, and specifically, what are the main concepts from these disciplines that we can apply in strategic foresight and managing uncertainty? So, going back to your question, how do we distinguish them? Yeah, I do not distinguish them anymore
Hmm.
by saying this philosophical tradition versus that philosophical tradition, because at the end of the day, culturally and philosophically speaking, in East Asia right now, as you know very well, because you now still live in Taiwan, so you deal with Taiwanese every day. In their mind, these traditions come together at once. So, in other words, you would deal with a person, a Taiwanese or a Chinese in the mainland or a Japanese, and they would, without even knowing, they would have Confucian precepts they comply with, such as filial piety for the elders, At the same time, they may see reality through some Buddhist teachings. Right? They may have a very strong practice of pursuits of peace by meditating every day, for example. It's not uncommon in the East. And they may also abide by some Taoist precepts as well. Altogether, they may, for example, be advocate of returning to nature or Wu Wei, doing by not doing. So basically, the least intervention possible in human relations and business as well. So it's basically a very effective mindset. The counterpart of Wu Wei in the West would be efficiency. Efficiency. Right?
Hmm.
I am simplifying it, but yeah. So these three traditions come together right now, and I think the only way we can distinguish them is by discussing singular concepts, because
Hmm.
they're all intertwined in the modern world. But if we single out concepts, we can say, okay, this concept is a bit more leaning towards Zen, for example, right? Oh, okay, this concept is a bit more leaning towards Daoism. But there really are, at the end of the day, also all these concepts are sometimes common among the traditions. It's just about emphasis. It's just a matter of degree. For example,
Yeah.
if we talk about koans, now, of course, koans would be uh, a bit more emphasized, relatively more emphasized in the Zen Buddhist tradition, right? There's this idea that the Zen master speaks in koan. So instead of giving you a long explanation, it will just have a very short answer that seems very cryptic, right? So
Hmm.
you as a Zen student, you might go to your master and say, "Master, I'm facing this, and nothing makes sense anymore. How do I achieve enlightenment?" And the master might just say, "Perhaps you need to die." And of course, it doesn't mean that you need to die in the body. Metaphorically speaking, it means maybe your old self needs to be let go of. You need a new self, something like that. So that the koan approach is a bit more emphasized in the Zen tradition. But yet, if you think about it, Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, it's actually a series of koans, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about the Tao Te Ching, it's also a series of metaphorical, cryptic, short quips of knowledge.
Hmm.
And the Analects by Confucius, in some of its part, it's also the same. So again, it's about which tradition emphasizes it more, but that at the same time they are shared among all these traditions. Don't you think so?
Yeah. There's certainly, of course, you can find people who will, you can, find priests and specialists who will, claim to be this or that. But I think for
Yeah.
regular people, all these influences are there all the time. Maybe they come out a little bit in different situations. But they do
Mhm.
have I think they have pretty clear different emphases, at least for me. Taoism is what I currently know best. So, I mean, I have read
Mm.
the Analects at some point. I feel like I know Zen more through a kind of cultural osmosis. I haven't
Yeah.
specifically studied it, but you get a lot of kind of ideas trickling into you just from living
Yes,
in
for
a
sure, especially
culture.
on Zen. Because Zen is in the pop culture, right?
Yeah, yeah, so much in pop culture.
But actually,
Um,
let me suggest also for the listeners, I suggest an author. So my view on these philosophies changed a bit as I was reading Derek Lim, if I'm
hmm,
not wrong. He has a few books. One is called The Tao of Wisdom. I would go for the Tao Wisdom, perhaps. He also has a translation of the Tao Te Ching as well. So he is a scholar of Taoism, and as I was reading him, uh, he does a great job in weaving in all the philosophies at once,
hmm,
and in explaining as well that some of the high level concepts, the very abstract concepts, are there everywhere in the East. So that's why I want to take a step back. That's why my my views of the whole field changed a bit because I think when I was writing the book, I thought of these philosophies in a more distinct way. I
Hmm.
thought them as distinct. Then, as I keep reading the scriptures, and then as I approach more texts, because I have gone into these themes much more in depth after the book, to be honest,
Hmm.
actually. Especially after I read Derek Lim, it seemed to me that okay, the distinction is not clear anymore at this point because they agree on a lot of things. So I would suggest to the listeners who are interested to kind of draw the commonalities among these the disciplines all together to look into Derek Lim's books. Very interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've read anything by him, so I'll have to take a look for that. But yeah, I think just as an example, maybe of course Taoism centers on the concept of Tao, which is
Mm,
kind of a maybe in the West we might say metaphysical idea, but of course that's also used in Confucianism. Um, although we tend to think of, I mean, again, I'm not, you can maybe say more, but I tend to think
mm.
of Confucianism as a little bit more oriented toward kind of ethics and social life. But
Yeah, self-regulation,
yeah, and then
self
Zen,
self-cultivation and
yeah,
rituals. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and then Zen is in some ways very close to Taoism because you Buddhism traveled through China and mixed with
yeah.
Taoism, and then
They
Japanese
combine.
scholars came to China and picked it up and brought it back, and so of course there's a lot of overlap there. So it can be difficult to untangle. And of course, as you
Yeah,
said,
those two.
the koans that they use in Buddhism, Zen and Chan Buddhism, there's something pretty similar in Daoism with things like the Dao De Jing. And I was also going to ask, so in your appendix, you mentioned the Yijing. I don't know if you've thought more about that
Ah,
since. I've been reading a little bit about it in the
oh
last
yes.
couple of days, and
Ah yes.
it seems like there's maybe an interesting relation with scenario planning or kind of reinterpreting the present through thinking about the future or something like that. I don't know. Is there anything that you?
I have been digging deeper and deeper into the I Ching after
Okay.
the book,
Hmm.
to the point that right now I actually do I Ching readings to myself and to friends.
Okay.
Informally, I'm
Oh,
not charging anything
yeah.
because I do think this is something that requires a volunteer basis. So
Hmm.
I do it because I'm seeing great value in it. And yes, as I think I mentioned in the appendix of the book, I Ching is a primordial futures thinking tool. So we can even say it's a primordial scenario planning tool if we
Hmm.
stretch it a bit. Because I Ching is a set of hexagrams, is 64 hexagrams, and those hexagram have archetypal meaning just like tarots. They are patterns that we see in life, and they saw them thousands of years ago. They could be seen thousands of years ago as much as they can be seen now. So they're very useful lenses to interpret life. Now, we can use the I Ching as a divination tool whereby we ask a question and then we throw three coins, and then by a process of drawing coins, we come up with hexagram
Right.
or two hexagrams sometimes, because sometimes there are changing lines. So it's
Hmm.
maybe two
Right.
hexagrams. So that is a more complex reading. And the hexagram would have a, a pattern. So it would tell you a pattern of change in the future. And that pattern is a systematic way to guide your decision making. Now, of course, this is different from scenario planning because in scenario planning, we analyze trends of the present and then we plot different scenarios. So it's different, arguably. But in a way, again, I always try to think of a more abstract, high level, inclusive way to look at things. So in a way, using a more abstract and high level and inclusive and forgiving way to look at things. It's also a futurist thinking modality in a way that it helps you systematically think about the future. And so very much there, as you said, you're right, in the very idea of I Ching, which is one of the, sorry, I would say arguably the most uh, popular divination book in the Taoist tradition, or even we could even say the most popular divination book in the Eastern tradition. Uh, Even there are already seeds of modern foresight. So, can't you see the commonality? It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
So why did we lose it? It's a pity that we lost it. In fact, to be honest with you, in the book itself, I could have explained more about the um, how to use the I Ching as a scenario planning and foresight tool, because this
Mm.
is just a philosophical musing that there is a commonality there. But in the book, in the narrative, in the novel, the I Ching doesn't really come up. So I could have done
Yeah.
a better job. But no worries. Actually, this I think this is a good time to mention that we are actually adapting the book into a TV series. And
Hmm.
so in the TV series, there will be more on that.
Okay. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder if you can give, I'm curious about if you can give any examples of how you've used the I Ching. Maybe I should say this it usually is translated as the Book of Changes, just in case
Book of
people
change.
want to look it up. But I wonder if you can give an example of how it might be used
How
or
to
how
use it.
you've used it since writing the book
Yeah.
in terms of
In
thinking
in
about
in
present
general in
problems.
life, in
Yeah,
general in life, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so for example, you can pick the I Ching for questions in daily life, and they should not be yes or no questions, because the I Ching is a complex book, and um, it's embracing at its very foundation. It's embracing the assumption that reality is complex and intertwined, and there are many ways to achieve outcomes, and there are many successful outcomes that are very different. So you can solve a problem or getting out of a tough situation in many different ways. So um, based on that assumption, you should not ask yes or no question to the I
Yeah.
Ching. So you're not going to ask, "Hey, is this partner good for me? Yes or no?" Right? For that,
Mm,
you can use other things. Maybe a psychic charge pendulum. I don't know. But for the
mhm,
I Ching, you should ask questions that are related to how you approach a problem. And it could not necessarily, it might not necessarily be a problem. It could also be a larger life situation. So, for
mm,
example, more recently, I think the most recent reading I did for myself was because I am now in a career transition. And so I wanted more clarity on my next chapter. Is it going to be more intellectual? Is it going to be more physical? Because I do a lot of martial arts, as you mentioned. I do know aspects of this next chapter. So, for example, I do know for sure that it's going to involve guiding people and service a larger community, but I'm still unclear about the vehicle and the message. So, this is a perfect question to ask the I Ching because, as you can see, this is not a yes or no question. It's more like a how question. So, how do I approach? Uh, my next phase of my life. Or also could be a what question, like what am I supposed to do? In what aspects of life should I focus? So that I threw the coins. The listener can just Google how to do this. It's very simple. You need three coins, and then you throw them, and based on the combination of head and tails, you throw them six times actually. So you can draw six lines. That is the six lines of a hexagram. So what happens is that you will throw them six times, and depending on the combination of head and tails, you will have six lines, and that is the hexagram. It could be either one hexagram, or it could be an hexagram with changing lines into a new hexagram. So it's two hexagrams. So if it's one hexagram, the answer to your question is in that hexagram. So it's pretty self-explanatory. If it's two hexagrams, the answer to your question will be over time, first in the first hexagram, and then it will uh, lead to the second hexagram. And
mm.
it's uncannily accurate. Sometimes it's very informative. So I encourage anybody to try. You don't need psychic abilities for it. The only thing I would say is to try to do it with a calm mind. Uh, don't approach the reading with a skeptical or fearful or anxious mind. We have plenty of science showing that these things work better when you set up the right atmosphere with a low frequency mind, so relaxed mindset.
Hmm.
That's the only recommendation. As long as you have a relaxed mindset, go for it, and you'll be surprised that it sometimes comes up with very insightful suggestions.
Now, I imagine you must be one of the few people in the world who has done both Yijing practices as well as scenario planning or foresight workshop kind of things. I'm wondering how you feel those
Yeah.
compare, if it's even possible to compare them, and
Ah,
how they might be useful in different situations, or I don't
that's a
know.
great
I'm just curious
that's a
how you
great
might compare. Yeah.
Yeah, and they are complementary, you're right. And more recently, I've been more and more attracted to practices such as the I Ching for the simple reason that methods such as scenario planning are always practiced in a corporate context, right, or in an organizational context. So there is very little emphasis on individual issues. So in other words, there the problems addressed in scenario planning are organizational problems, and they value and they prioritize the benefit of the group of executives.
Hmm.
And so, as I have been practicing and facilitating scenario planning, one of the major drawbacks I saw is that every single executive, they have their own existential issues that they bring up to the scenario planning workshop, and we cannot really fully address those individual existential, career oriented, occupational oriented, but also meaning and purpose oriented, deeper things, right? And so scenario planning can go as far as to help an organization with its purpose and direction and strategy. But when it comes to the life coaching aspect of the CEO, it cannot do much. And so that's why these tools help to complement more organizational scenario planning tools. And that's why more recently I've been more and more attracted to these tools because again, in my work as a professor, I still teach strategy and scenarios and innovation and design thinking. And yet at the same time, I see a lot of my students who are all MBA students, so senior executives, or EMBA students, so senior executives, or DBA students, so senior executives, right? And so I see all these students, they have very personal, occupational, at least partially occupational, purpose-driven, meaning-driven issues. And so all of this stuff we teach in the university, none of them can help them. So
Yeah.
I have been trying to dig deeper. And in fact, I integrate these tools deeper now in my classes, but also as a 101 in my consulting hours to help them individually. So I Ching, intuition, what else? um, Spiritual practices. I recommend some forms of meditation. Sometimes I point towards certain sources. I do use koans as well. So sometimes they ask me a question, I reply with a koan,
Hmm.
and they're like, oh, interesting. So, but individual based, right? So it's more on a 101. And it complements with these organizational scenario planning practices that are more group based.
Right. Okay, very
Does it make
interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. I've often wondered, people listening may know that I've done a lot of work with the philosopher Ogilvy, who,
Oh, good. Yes, yes,
yeah,
yes. I
has done a
recall you
lot
have
in,
helped them to put together a book, right? Yeah.
yeah, and
With
Alex has done a show with a podcast with him
the
as
show
well.
with him. Yeah.
And but I kind of the only way I really know about scenario planning, or at least the way that I first learned about it, was through his work. And I've often wondered, like,
Uh-huh.
well, it seems like something that could be applicable somehow to an individual life. Like, I feel like I could make a 4x4 grid, and
You could. I absolutely, I should have said this earlier. You could definitely do scenarios for your own life.
yeah.
And in fact, there are folks who specialize in that. Was it Wheelwright, if I'm not wrong, Wheelwright
Hmm.
Personal Futures. It's got a book on personal futures. And
Okay.
so basically, it's the application of foresight onto your own life and career trajectory. But again, in my opinion, it works up to a point because there's always this organizational, this corporate flavor.
Hmm.
It's very logical as well, very compartmentalized. So when I go and look into spiritual practices such as the I Ching, for example, they go much deeper when it comes to meaning, purpose, trauma as well. Sometimes there are karmic things coming out. I would like to mention other tools as well for
Hmm.
people who like these tools, these things. So one thing is the human design system, which is a combination of Eastern and Western wisdom uh, that can really help people to dig deeper into their purpose, meaning, and futures. Yes. And one that is very much related to the I Ching is the gene keys.
Hmm.
So the gene keys is also another tool, which is a combination of the I Ching, divination, but also of other systems of knowledge, such as the human design system itself, the Vedic traditions or the chakra tradition, natal charts, and so on, that can help you really plot uh, your life trajectory in a way. So it's I'm simplifying it, but it could be, let's just say, to simplify a lot. Okay. It's a spiritual foresight for the self. Does it make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, I
Spiritual
think so.
foresight for the self. Like,
Yeah.
foresight is for the organization. These tools are for the self, and they have a
Hmm.
much stronger spiritual emphasis. So
Hmm.
I have been drawn more and more into these as a consequence, and partly because I was writing the book, The Tao of Foresight, but also because I see the complementarity and deeper meaning for one-on-one sessions. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It just popped into my head that you've maybe there's a little bit of that split in the Asian traditions too, where you have one set of traditions or texts that are oriented more like to governance, and maybe
Yeah.
Confucianism is a little bit like
Yes.
that, about talking about how to properly govern things. But then you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
more that are like more about personal development or kind of for the individual, and maybe Daoism,
Yes.
Buddhism are a little bit more like that, where it's
Yes.
more kind of individual. So I don't know. That's just an interest, a parallel that popped into my head there. Um,
Absolutely.
But yeah, maybe transitioning to maybe
Mm,
the end of our talk, perhaps. We've been talking about an hour or
mm,
a little bit less. But
mm.
so you mentioned the book that you're working on adapting it into a TV series. I'm just curious maybe about that or other more recent stuff. It sounds like you've really been developing these ideas a lot more with
A
engaging
lot
with
more.
the Yijing, and I'm just curious what other things are on the horizon, what you're interested in doing, how you're continuing to explore these ideas.
Thank you for asking, David. So yes, definitely the book. I'm grateful that I somehow ended up writing that book, because that book was the beginning of me going back into these philosophies much more deeply, and also their practical applications. So yes, I'm looking at many different ways in deepening the applications of these philosophies. One is the TV series that we're doing. So we're doing animated, by the way, animated TV
Hmm.
series that will be loosely based on the Tao of Foresight, a bit dramatized. At this moment, we are starting with simple trailers. We have some drafts, but we don't have the final trailer. So the next very tangible step would be to create simple trailers, which we will in turn use to find to look for producers, so that we can have better funding to produce a full-fledged animated TV series that we will then try to sell to networks. So that's one, and that of course will, being dramatized, it will be more entertaining and more adventurous, and perhaps a bit more kung fu fights, but also hopefully also, because we have more time to discuss new things that came out that came up after I wrote the book. Hopefully also more philosophical commonalities with Eastern Asian traditions. So that's one. I almost finished writing my second book as well, which is Kung Fu thriller. So it's also a novel with a lot of martial arts, but there is a lot of teaching as well. So it's an edutainment book as well. So it's a story of a boy who goes to China to find a Kung Fu master, just as I did. So it's inspired by my own story, but I use a third person. So I want to detach from my own ego, and through the story, he learns lots of things about Taoism and Zen and Confucianism. So all these philosophies. What else? Yeah, I'm also writing some papers on the subject. So definitely digging more into this. Uh, and the Dao of Foresight was in a way just the beginning. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, great. Excellent. I guess maybe if we have a few more minutes, I guess that leads also into the question of kind of the medium of communication. And
Mm.
I'm just curious, as because I'm someone also who has struggled with this, what is the best way to get across my
I,
ideas, to find audiences?
yeah,
Um, and
I know.
I'm still very more in the academic mode.
Mm,
But I do think about other way, and of course I do the videos and stuff and online stuff as a kind of alternate form.
mm.
But I'm always trying to explore new ways to get across ideas, explore ideas, communicate with people. Um, yeah, do you have any thoughts about um, I don't know, what's been helpful for you in figuring out? Because I know I've seen some of your videos, you were experimenting with kind of a new video format, which I really
Yeah.
liked a couple of things that you posted with that. I know that's a lot of work to make those videos, kind of the
I
masters of
try it different ways. Yeah, you're right. The communication is always an issue when it comes to academic subjects that have value, that have value but needs simplification, right?
right.
And also, right now, there's just so much content, it's very difficult to gain attention. So, and to be honest with you, I'm also struggling with it. So I'm in the same situation. I don't think I should give advice to anybody. In fact, I'm just like you. I'm asking, hey, what is the right way? But the only thing that I keep doing it because it's just the only way that seemed to work is to prototype new things. Just keep
Right.
prototyping. So, and a lot of things you might have seen on my YouTube channel where experiments were prototypes.
Right.
And right now, I'm prototyping new things. I mean, the next book I'm writing, it's a self-discovery kung fu thriller. It's a completely new genre, right? Nobody has ever
Hmm.
written a self-discovery kung fu thriller. So I weave philosophical depth with martial arts. The Dao of Foresight was a prototype. Nobody has ever written what is it, a business wisdom wuxia novel. So the modality, the vehicle should always change until you find something that works. And sometimes you never find it, it keeps prototyping. And
Yeah.
I'm actually still prototyping very wild things. I'm writing a script right now for some Instagram shorts. So we are doing some stunt work here in Manila,
Hmm.
where I'm based 80% of my time. I'm collaborating with a stunt studio, action design. So we do fight choreography, a lot of that. And so we're prototyping with a script that teaches Asian philosophies, but through a stories that is very much of a kung fu movie, but in vertical format for Instagram, for example. That's one.
Hmm.
So keep prototyping. That's my only answer to that. And some of those prototypes will suck and will not work, and some of those may be surprising successes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Prototyping. Yeah.
What
Good.
is your answer? Well, you for sure have also good answers to that. What is your answer to the communication problem? I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't have a really good answer. I mean, I'm a writer. If this
Me
was,
neither.
I often think if this was, 50 years ago or even like 30 years ago, I'd just be,
Mm,
writing papers. Maybe I'd
mm.
write some kind of popular press type articles on these
Op-eds, yeah,
topics.
op-eds is a good word.
Yeah, op-eds. But now there's so many options, so many choices, so many
I
things to
know.
try. The audience is split in so many different places
That's right.
and I'm still a writer. Like I really like to write. That's how I like to really express myself as kind of like my first choice. But I also like exploring videos. It's a, different kind of thing, lets you be a little bit more informal, at least when you're having conversations like this. And I like writing short online things that sometimes get picked up and become a little bit popular. But
Op-eds are really good right now because I mean nobody has the time to read those long academic papers,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Another thing I came to my mind is audiobooks. I love
Mhm.
audiobooks. You can in our busy life, you can just listen to an audiobook while you're waiting in queue at the airport, something you cannot do with a paperback. It's amazing. And by the way, that yeah, they are producing the audiobook of the Tao of Foresight. I forgot to say they're doing it right now.
Uh,
So audiobook is another way, and not right now it's so easy for you to produce an audiobook and get it self-published on Audible. You can get it done in just a day. If you have a book written, you can get it done in a day. It's crazy how easy it is. So yeah, keep doing different things, right? That's the only way.
yeah. Yeah, audiobooks are great too. That's a,
Audible.
I forgot about that. I had thought about
Right.
that, recording audio versions of stuff, but yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. All right.
Mhm.
Well, good. I think this was really fun for me, enlightening.
It was awesome. Thank you, David.
Yeah, so thank you very much for taking the time. And
Absolutely. I'm sorry we just managed to scratch the surface of this because there's so much depth in these things, and in 1 hour you can say very little. But I'm hopeful that we have at least triggered the inspiration. For those who are interested, I hope we have, and I'm sure we have triggered the inspiration because we cannot get in any depth, right, in 1 hour.
right. And I think this was a good kind of introduction to
Hmm.
your work and how we relate. And, was
Hmm.
wide ranging. And maybe in the a future time, we can break off a smaller piece and go into more
Hmm. Absolutely.
detail. Of course, now that I know, especially that you're so focused on um, developing some of these ideas from Asian philosophy,
Yeah.
which I'm also interested in, like the Yijing and that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot we can talk about in the
Let me know. I'll
future.
do a I Ching reading for you. If you have a question,
Okay.
I'll do a I Ching reading for you.
Yeah, that would be fun. I've never tried to
You
do one or had one done,
you'll
so
be surprised. Yeah, you'll be surprised.
I'd like to see exactly how it works.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you,
And
David.
yeah,
Take care. It was lovely. Thanks again. It was awesome to talk about these themes with you. Very honored.
yeah, it was great talking to you.